Hey guys, how are you doing? This is Zed from Zed Outdoors and I hope you're having an awesome day. So today I've come down to see talented full-time craftsman Jack Wheeler. Jack, how are you doing?
I'm good, Zed. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So if you're not familiar with Jack, I've actually filmed a video previously with Jack where we've done a tour of his beautiful workshop here in the county of Norfolk in the east of England. Now in that video, what we've done, we had a good walk around Jack's workshop. He's a full-time woodworker with a background in timber frame structures and specializing in more smaller items now. We've done a detailed tour and also we spoke to Jack about his background and a close-up look of all the various items that he makes. If you haven't checked out that video already, highly suggest you do. Link to that will be down below in the description. Now in this video, what we're going to be looking at is Jack's process for carving a Wagatabon tray with hand tools. This is an object that I only became familiar with about a year ago, and I've been fascinated ever since. And Jack carves the most beautiful trays. So what we're going to be doing in this video, Jack is very kindly going to be showing his entire process for how he makes one literally from a raw piece of wood all the way to a finished product. So what we're going to do, a couple of things to mention before we get cracking on with the meat and bones of this video. Number one, as you can tell, this is a long video. That's because we're covering the entire process. Now to facilitate that, there are a couple of things going on. If you look at the timestamp of this video, you can see all the sections of this video marked out in various chapters. Also, if you look at the description below, all the different sections are marked out. On the left-hand side, you can see all the times. YouTube has a very cool feature. If you click on that, it will jump straight to that particular section. So as you move forward, you can use this video as a reference video for trying this project out yourself. Secondly, what Jack has very kindly done, he's created a page on his website that gives a lot more information about Wagatabon. He has pictures of Wagatabon trays that he's carved, also part of the processes he covers as well. In the pictures, he's given a bit more information, etc. So that video and this video and also that page are like an accompaniment. So if you want to go check that page out, which I highly recommend you do, link to that will be also down below in the description. Now in this video, what we're going to do, we're going to start off with looking at a few examples of finished Wagatabon trays. So if you're unfamiliar with what that is, you can actually become up to scratch with what that entails, etc. And then we're going to go straight into a raw piece of wood, starting off with the processing all the way to a finished product. So Jack, with your kind permission, shall we begin?
Let's do it.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed the rest of this video where Jack Wheeler is going to be teaching you how to carve a Wagatabon tray with hand tools. So Jack, we're looking at a few examples of the trays here.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what we're looking at?
Yeah, so there's just a few of the trays that I've carved here, which gives you an idea of the variation on form that you can make. But in essence, this is what a Wagatabon tray is, which is sort of strongly inspired by, or directly inspired by a particular kind of Japanese tray that was traditionally carved by roof shingle makers as a kind of side to their shingle making. They would save the chestnut blanks and carved trays. And yeah, I first discovered these things a few years ago and sort of thought they had such a beautiful simplicity about them. So I sort of set about trying to make them myself and have made quite a lot over that time and kind of developed my own process, which is probably very similar to how they are made in Japan. But yeah, and that's it. So got these two are elm. Here I've used the live edges and just let the tree form dictate the shape of the thing, and I quite like that. That's a sort of new style for me. This one's a bit more rigid, and they all have this distinctive kind of grooved carving in the bottom and sides, or sometimes like this it can just be the bottom section. This one's sycamore with the urushi lacquer on. I often carve the bottoms of them as well. Just think it adds something, makes them more sort of tactile, and for a simple object you can take them in all sorts of different directions, and that's one of the things that keeps me interested in making them, I think. There's a few examples of pieces in progress here, and these are all, these ones are all sweet chestnut, which is really nice to carve. And here I've left the split surface, which will be part of the top rim of the trays. That's something I'm doing increasingly. I just really like that sort of contrast between clean, crisp carving and a natural split surface. I think it's kind of adds something. So they give you a bit of an idea about the process, which we'll dive into shortly. And then this one's a oak one, which in its very rough state. That one's dry, so that will be quite hard work carving, finishing, but you can work them green or dry.
So just before we get into the actual process then, it's worth recapping briefly something that we did cover in the previous video of your workshop tour, and that is your background is in timber frame structure, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so has that played a big part in terms of how you then approached how to figure out how to carve these, in terms of the working with hand tools, etc.?
I'm not sure that timber framing particularly has. I've done quite a lot of sort of carving work over the years, things that letter cutting and all sorts of different jobs that probably feed into some of the skill sets. There is an overlap. In fact, just thinking out loud, chopping a mortise by hand with a mallet and chisel does have some shared sort of technique going on. So I guess so in a way, but. No, I think it's more just seeing them, trying out various processes, and then kind of coming to a process that works for me, basically.
So moving into the process itself, we're obviously going to process the wood. So you mentioned a moment ago that you can work with either green or seasoned wood.
Yeah.
So are there kind of pros and cons to each kind of option?
Yeah, and that's a sort of continually evolving thing with me. I do both, depending on the wood I'm using. I tend to work with larger diameter trees, and so how I orient the grain in the trays is dictated by that. I'll often work with quarter sawn or radially split material because it gives a bit more of a stable board, basically, so the movement is less severe. If I was to just take what we call a tangential board out of the tree, which often Wagatabon traditionally were made like, or the ones I've seen, you'd expect a lot more movement. So you might see that, like here, this one is a tangential tray, but you can see it maybe better here. So the middle of the tree's up here somewhere, and the outside is round here. You'd expect that to cup quite a lot. So yeah, that's my reasoning for taking them more radial. But then you get very beautiful grain patterns coming through when you do them tangentially as well. So there's different approaches, and nothing's right. Green wood is much kinder, softer, easier to carve, basically. Once it's dry, it's hard. And I find that there's somewhere in the middle, so I'll often take them to this kind of rough carved stage and then leave them to pretty much dry, because a lot of the movement in timber happens early on in the drying process, and then I can always re-flatten the bottom. I mean, it's not like, it doesn't have to be a mirror finish to perfect flat surface, but you don't want it to wobble about on the table, sort of thing. Also, drier wood can tend to take a bit of a cleaner finish off the gouge, off the tools, which can be nice as well.
So Jack, what wood are we going to be working with today?
So this is a piece of cherry, which grew about, I don't know, quarter of a mile in that direction on the estate here. Quite a nice big diameter tree. I haven't actually carved a cherry Wagatabon, so this is a first for me, but I had lots of this wood lying around, so I thought we'd have a go. And it's pretty fresh as well, so it should carve quite nicely.
So how are you going to begin the process?
So what I'm looking to do is to create a kind of a board that is coming out radially from the middle. We could either take if you were converting this, you could take it into boards across like that, or like I've done here, from the middle to the outside, which is a sort of what we would call a quarter sawn or radially oriented board, and what that gives you is a slightly more stable board that will as it dries it will warp less dramatically. So for a tray it should be a bit more stable. I still expect some movement because you're removing a lot of the material from inside of the board. You're exposing end grain, which will mean it does dry unevenly a little bit, but it will be much less dramatic than a tangentially converted board, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start by breaking it open, and then we'll choose where to take the board, see how much twist there is in it and that sort of thing.
Just a quick question before you do that.
Yeah.
For those watching, are there any recommended types of wood that they use, species, or?
I think traditionally they were using chestnut, and I don't know if that chestnut is similar to our sweet chestnut, or perhaps it is a bit similar. I don't know about the Japanese material, but certainly it works really nicely with sweet chestnut. I've used a few different timbers and sort of played around. I've made quite a few oak ones and chestnut. Generally, I probably wouldn't go down the route of choosing cherry because it's actually quite a sort of wild wood as it dries. It distorts quite a lot. So I'm kind of curious to see how this one works out, and we won't know that until, a couple of months down the line when it's completely dried. But I've also experimented a little bit with carving them and then sort of putting them in stick like you would season boards when you sawed them out. So actually putting weight on top and keeping them flat, and that's been quite successful really. So there's lots of things you can do to try and work around the movement and that sort of thing. So yeah, we'll get cracking and break it open. I'm just going to use some metal wedges and have a look at where it's already opened up quite a lot since I cut it yesterday, I think. So it wants to break open. So we'll just go in here, I think. We'll break that piece out. So there's a little bit of rot in this tree, which really hasn't posed much of an issue. It's so close to the pith anyway. So I'm really looking for the widest sort of section. Might be in here somewhere. Just going to have to look where it runs on that side.
So is there a reason you cut it at a slight?
Like taking that bite out of it like that. I was just following the natural where it had opened up. I could have ignored that and come straight across here. There's no massive reason. But really I'm just sort of being guided by how the tree has started to open up as it's. Right. And then I'm kind of looking at what I've got here a little bit, and what I'm looking at is how the grain's running, where it's twisted. It's got a little bit of a twist in it, but that's all workable. I think I'm going to take this section that I've marked on here earlier. I thought that looked like a good bet. So now I'm going to use the fro. Could have used that earlier, but the diameter of the log is a bit wider to go right across there, so it's easier to do it really with wedges. Oh, doesn't want to go. So go back to the wedges. It's always surprising, something going on in there. Right. So this was what was causing me some issues with the fro. Just a little branch in there. So I think I quite like that. I think I'll try and split that piece off there and then we'll see what we end up with. Let's try this again. So I'm looking probably to have a tray that's maybe 40mm, 30 to 40mm in depth. So I'm going thicker at the moment because I'm not quite sure where this is going to go, the split. Generally it's quite a good rule to try and sort of think about halving the piece of wood as you split it if you want more control over it. So I'm sort of somewhere there anyway. We'll see where it goes.
This is where you need to do your Captain America move.
I do, don't I? The bark and sapwood on cherry is quite stubborn. We'll get there. Going from that side. Probably would have gone in with a little axe if I had one out here. Okay, I can work with that. So that's our sort of very rough blank, which is now ready to be processed further inside.
So back inside your workshop, what's next?
So I've got this very sort of crude split blank, which was reluctant to be released from the tree, but we've got there. I'm just having a look at it, and as I was saying, when we looked at some of the examples and some of the work that was in progress, I'm really sort of liking exploiting some of this riven surface. So I thought I might have a go at doing that with this piece. And the next process then is to basically establish a flat bottom. If I was going to have create a completely flat board, top and bottom, then obviously I'd do it's the same process both sides. But I'm going to leave this riven surface to create a kind of uneven, wavy rim to the tray, if that makes sense. So I'm going to grab an axe, and you can see it's not very flat at all. I'm going to sort of dress down some of that a little bit, and then we'll move on to some planing after that. So, and I'm basically just going to work by eye, looking sort of at the thickness that I've got of material here, the same on this side, and just work down by eye, making some starting with some sort of relief cuts on the high spots. Got some changes in grain direction here, so it could be quite I like to use quite a heavy axe for this, just because it'll power through the material a bit quicker.
So is that a vintage axe? Or?
Yeah, it's an old, it's probably not that old, it might be from the 50s or something. It says Ewell 2.5, which will be 2.5 pounds, so it's quite heavy. But I do tend to prefer a bit of a heavier tool. If I was using it all day, I might pick up a lighter one after a while. So I'm flipping it round, just reacting to changes in grain direction. You could use a side axe for this, would be quite good on a wider board. So by that I mean an axe with a bevel on one side, so it's a bit more like a plane, and you can get across there a bit easier. But this will do the job. Any old axe would do the job. Can come across the grain as well. So now I'm just starting to look a bit more carefully where I've got some high spots, just here. Right, getting there, a little bit here. Okay. If I had a nicer piece of wood with a cleaner grain, I might go a bit further with this, but I think, and I could keep going with it, but I think I'll probably now move on to a plane because it's going to be easier to cut across some of the irregular grain. But before I do that, I'm going to take off this sapwood. Sapwood on cherry dries very much at a different rate to the heartwood, and so I'm going to get rid of that on there because I don't really want that difference of shrinkage on the tray. And then I'll just take a little bit of that rotten material off the middle.
So would I be right in saying that it's also important to remove the pith if there's any on there?
Yeah, you wouldn't want the pith on the work. Yeah, pretty much for any thing you were making with wood, you'd work around that. You're going to have cracks opening from that point basically in the tree. So yeah, you're best to come away from that. And also, it's difficult to see the grain orientation on here, but it's not a true quarter-sawn material. You can see the growth rings they're sort of here. So whereas it on more true radially split material, they'd be perpendicular to at right angles to the board, but. We'll work with it, it'll be fine. So we've got quite a thickness there, but I think I'll take that material down a bit more with a plane. So I'm going to move over here now. I've got a little batten in the bench here that basically acts as a stop for planing in that direction. I found that to be quite useful. And that seems to be staying, because I've got this irregular surface on the top. If it's really rocking around a lot, I might need a little wooden wedge in. It seems to be staying all right. I'll just grab a little one. See how it goes.
So you ideally want it stable and not rocking?
Yeah, and I'll react to how it moves around as I start planing it. But yeah, wedges are very useful for that, or there's all sorts of different ways you can hold things, but the simpler the better. So I really like working against just a single sort of stop, because you don't have to do anything, you just put it there and it's done, sort of thing. So we'll see. If it dances around too much, I might have to hold it in a different way. So now I'm going to take one of these, what are called scrub planes. So it's just a wooden plane, a very big open mouth in it. Doesn't have to be that wide. This one's just had a lot of use. And then a curved iron, so they're designed for removing a lot of material fairly quickly, sort of thing. So.
Could people use any plane they have, or is there kind of some that are more optimal than others?
Yeah, I mean, if you just took a regular smoothing plane on this, you'd be spending a lot more time basically. So this will iron out, this will get you down to a sort of more uniform surface quicker. So these would have been traditionally used from sort of an axe-hewn board. You'd then take a scrub planes and then you'd move on through different finer planes to to get a finer finish. So you could do it with any plane, but it might just basically take longer. Yeah. So usually working, you might need to just get a hammer to adjust the.
So you're working at an angle?
Yeah, you can sort of find with planing very green wood that's the grain's a little bit irregular like this. It's sort of, you'll find a sweet spot where it's happiest to be planed. So I just sort of responding to, usually at a sort of diagonal angle, cuts quite nicely. Can take a bit of a bigger cut than that.
So is that how you adjust how much is taken off by?
That's just pushing they're just very simple, held in by a wedge, one single iron, and that, I'm literally just tapping the blade down further.
So depending on how much that pops out is how much it will take off?
Exactly that, yeah. And if I wanted to bring it back up again, you can hit this button here, hit the plane there, or sometimes on the toe of it, not on these ones, but yeah, very, very simple but effective. So you can hear that's taken a bigger bite now.
And at this stage, are you looking to get a completely flat surface now, or?
I mean, yeah, although there's room later in the process to rework that surface, so I'm not going to get too fussy over it. But yeah, I want it to sit on here and be fairly well registered on that surface, sort of thing. So that's what I'm aiming for. You can see it removes material fairly quickly. It actually leaves quite a nice surface as well. Sort of, you can use it. Just having a little look really and seeing where the high spots are. A little bit of, take a little bit more material here, and then I think we can probably I'm going to set the plane a little bit less now.
Are these the more finer cuts then?
I just adjusted the plane like to take a finer cut because I was finding it was tearing a little bit out, and basically going over the surface just to refine it a little bit. And now I think I'm basically happy with that. It's fairly, well, I mean, it's got a little high area here, but if it sits, yeah, I'll probably take a little bit more off there. And I'm just sighting down these sides and seeing if it's got any twist in it, because it's quite easy to plane a bit of twist into a small board like that. So I'm just going to move a little bit more material from this kind of area where it's got a little sort of bump in it, and then I think it's good to move on to the next step. So you can probably, yeah, it's got a little rock on that side, and it's quite good on the other side. So I'm just sort of coming into the cut around about the halfway point, and I'll probably make a couple of passes to focus in on moving a bit more material from that kind of area. Tiny bit there. I'm okay with that. A little bit of a rock. Tiny bit off there. And you can use a straight edge to kind of check a little bit. It's not a piece of joinery, it's much more rough and ready than that. So that's basically where I'm going to take that to for the moment, and I'll come back to that surface a bit later on in the process. So now we're ready to sort of jump over onto the other bench and move on to the next step.
So what's next in the process, Jack?
So we've got our flattened on one side, very much not flattened on the other side, blank, and I'm quite happy with that. We're gonna work with it as it is. If you wanted to create a sort of parallel thickness flat board to make the trays, which I have done on some of the examples that I showed you, you would exactly repeat the same process, and you'd mark out or reference that top surface off the surface you've just made. So you'd probably, you'd decide on the thickness and mark some reference lines maybe, and then remove some of this material with the axe and the plane, just as we have done. But we're not going to do that. We're going to jump straight onto it. So now I'm going to mark out on the top surface as best I can, which is not that straightforward through this split surface. I'm going to mark out the dimensions of the tray, and I'm going to mark the outside. I'm going to mark two sets of lines, the outside and the inside. and I'm just going to use a square for that. And I think I'm going to come inside this troublesome area there, just for you could quite happily include that grain deviation, but just for this, I'm going to step inside there and come somewhere about there. I think there's no rules about this. I quite like completely following the grain, so I'll just sort of freehand draw some lines. Sometimes, as on one of the pieces I showed you, I left the veiny edge. And sometimes I like to, just make a standard rectangular form inside there. And I think that's what I'm going to do here. So, again, this is very much my own sort of process. Just going to lift that. I'm going to step back to there. I think I might need to put some lights on actually, because I'm finding it hard to see. Right, coming about there. And if you look up the word Wagatabon and sort of go down that rabbit hole online, you'll see that there's a whole sort of universe of possibilities with shapes and forms of these things, and it's kind of endless. So, while I'm going down the hard sort of rigid right angle approach here, that's not what you have to do. I'm just doing it for this demonstration really, and I quite like that sort of contrast with the sort of right angles and then this completely irregular surface on the top. Something quite nice about it. But you can do all sorts. So now I'm going to. So this is sort of loosely the outside of the tray, and now I'm going to come in and a mount. There, it's about 8 millimeters. Does that sound right, Zed?
Yeah. So this is basically going to be the rim, isn't it?
This is going to be, this is going to be the rim. Sometimes I've seen 3 sets of lines, and I think in people's process for making these, and without always having the language barrier with not being a Japanese speaker, I'm never quite sure what that is, but I think it's probably because the trays are often splayed on the sides. It's a kind of it's determining the bottom where you're cutting to on the edges of the bottom of the tray, if that makes any sense. Okay. That's that. 2 more. Come up there where I can see it. Definitely not the most straightforward marking on such a uneven surface, but Yeah, we like a challenge. And cherry wood has a fairly high tannin content, so this would take ebonising very well. Okay, something like that. Now, I'm going to round these corners. I'm just going to do that by eye, I think. So they've got a bit of a sort of radiused. Okay, something like that. With any sort of wood carving thing, I think the process of carving is really quite forgiving. You can mark some lines and you can move either side of them quite freely and sort of react to it. So it's quite a, I've always found it quite a nice process really in that way. Up to a point. If you go too far, you're done for. So now we're basically ready for beginning the carving process. So I'll go and grab some bits and pieces and we'll get started.
So, Jack, what's next in the process?
So yeah, we've got our prepared blank with some lines drawn on, sort of determining where we're going to make this tray. And now here you notice I've sort of, I've come in a bit here, I've come in a bit here. I could have taken this whole piece. I've just done that to avoid a little defect here that I couldn't be bothered. I'm being lazy basically. So yeah, and then yeah, we're going to get carving, and I've got 3 very basic tools and they're going to pretty much do the whole job for us here. So one is just a regular flat chisel and a couple of gouges of different sweeps. I found one with quite a deep sweep is really useful for the process that I use. It doesn't need to be that wide. You can use a narrower, but with that depth of sweep, it just sort of speeds up the process a bit. And then this is you could do the whole thing with just this one, but it would just take a little bit longer. This is just the gouge that I use for the finishing groove cuts into the bottom and sides of the tray.
Do you know these sizes off by heart?
No, and for this I would use different ones for different trays. I've played around with all sorts of different ones.
Right.
I found this is one I come back to. So this says on there, so these are all the Swiss-made file. I don't know, never know how you say that word, but so they're just easy to find off the shelf. Basically, these gouges. It's a number 7, so that's referring to the sweep, and then 14, which is the width of the gouge. So a 714 I find to be quite good. I think that's the one I use. And then this one's a number 9, which is a much deeper sweep, and a 20mm across, which I've also found to be quite good. But again, I could bring out 3 other tools that were all ones that I'd found on the car boot, and they work just the same. So, there's no hard and fast rule with it, but you don't need a big mass collection of tools to make these things. You might find there's bits where, you just think I need another little gouge to tidy up a corner here or there, but you can do it all with just this minimal tool set, which I like about them. They're very simple objects. And similarly, I should mention just the setup here, which is so basic. It's just a batten fixed to a bench. This could be anywhere. It could be, you know, a stool outside in your garden with a piece of batten nailed down into it. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. I use this non-slip stuff. I find it actually really adds a lot of friction and stops things sliding around quite so much. So yeah, that's that. So I'm going to start by just coming inside the lines I've marked, and basically just severing, just scoring. Because this wood splits fairly nicely, there's a risk that during the roughing out process I could sort of send a split where I don't want it to. So I'm sort of severing the fibres all the way around, just quickly and crudely, to try and reduce that risk. And then I come in with the straight one, not working right up to the edge. And don't have a tendency to really give it too much welly. If I was to really drive this in, there's every possibility that I would basically introduce a split into the piece, which I have done. Where's my? There he is. And we go in the end grain, which is probably the most important in a way. Okay, so now I'm going to take my deep number 9 gouge, and this is, I think, probably the process that is or was traditionally used or is still being in Japan to do this, but as I said before, I haven't been shown that by anyone, so I'm kind of finding my own way with it, but I found that it works quite well and it's fairly quick. So I'm just coming in a little bit from the edge, from the score line I've made. I'm going to cut. So I'm going to cut basically a series of channels across here, and I'm working to sort of the maximum depth of, as soon as these corners start to go below the surface, I'll try and demonstrate on that side. See, it's trying to lift the fibres off there, so you're going to introduce a split, which is risky when it's coming out of this side. So I'm just going to work down to, you know, most of the gouge depth, but not the full depth. I'm being quite careful not to go under. It's a lot easier to do that on a flat surface than this one that's rising and falling. Not worried about it there because it doesn't matter there. If I was near the edge, I'd be being a lot more careful with it. Okay, and then I switch out again for the flat chisel, and using those channels I've created, I'm going to split off some of the material in between. Again, being quite careful around these tricky sort of undulations in the surface here. Where the board's straighter, you can twist it around and come in that way. If I hadn't have severed this in the first place, if I hadn't have scored this line here, doing that would be quite risky. It would want to split off right over your rim. So that's an important step in the process, I think. I should say I'm using the bevel of the chisel flat down, and I'm constantly sort of adjusting, responding to the grain and everything where I put that. Quite often resting this part of my arm down so it's less tiring. Okay. So then I come back again with the deep gouge and basically repeat the same process. And as I go down, I'm starting to think a bit more about, probably in the next channel I do after splitting this material away, I'm starting to think about where that bottom is and the depth that I'm going to, and trying to establish a sort of a series of channels that are parallel to that, basically. Initially that was a bit more tricky because you've got all this change of direction going on the top. Again, I'm being quite careful here not to go below the surface there, particularly with this corner of the gouge. It's so easy to send a split this way. Just going to come in here again. beauty of this holding method, which is about as basic as it can be, is that you can just keep rotating the thing. You don't have to undo clamps or any of that faff, and it's pretty much staying where I need it to be. It's quite important in the corners to to make sure you're severing that end grain, particularly as you come up and clean up these edges on the sides, because yeah, it's just very easy to come in here a bit gun-ho, hammer down and send a split through here. Especially on this really fresh wood.
You were saying about when you go deeper down?
Yeah, so as you start to go a bit deeper, it gets a little bit more cutting across the grain, like breaking these sections out across the grain gets a little bit trickier. You can't really get if you come in here, you're too steep, you'll be digging down into the wood. You can sort of start from about there. So you can keep flipping it round, or equally go along the length of the grain as well. Just got to kind of adjust to where your tools can reach. In that way. So, just starting to have a little look where I am, where I want to be. Probably got maybe another couple of passes, and we'll be sort of getting there with the depth. I'm probably aiming. It depends on the wood and the size of the tray, but anywhere from like ½ an inch to 12 mil maybe a bit less, somewhere around that. You can go a bit, I could go a bit thinner here because this is quite a small tray. So I'm going to do a couple more passes, and then I'll start creating a more flatter a bit more on there. When you start working into these bottom corners, you kind of have to work in from both sides and go quite gently. You can give it some welly early on, but it's much more of a delicate sort of operation here. It's so easy to suddenly cut too deep or we're getting close now to the sort of depth that I'm aiming for. I'm still not going too close to my lines because I'll sort of come back to that and clean them up a little bit. I'm just going to grab another. Just clean there with a smaller gouge just to get that material out of that. Just sort of using my body weight to push down now. Still, you can use a mallet a bit here and there, but there's a point where I sort of stop doing that and start just pushing. So now I'm going to pick up a different gouge, having said I was going to do it all with 3. I found this really quite nice to just clean up the bottom, and it's basically it's a number 2, and it's quite a wide one. It's 40mm it says, so it's just got a very, very shallow curve on it. You know, you could do it all with the flat chisel and clean up the bottom, but it's just that much easier and nicer to carve with this because it hasn't got those sharp corners to dig in. So I just find I tend to just pick that up and just sort of go over the initially sort of just doing it by eye, and then I'll use my finger and thumb to feel. And again, I'm down to depth enough that I have to keep flipping it around to get to reach to the end. So I have to sort of keep working half one way and then half the other. So I'm now just going to sort of have a bit of a feel around and see, and a look as well. We've got so it feels quite nice here. It's quite thick on the bottom, but I'm okay with that. I'm probably going to go with that on there. It just feels like there's more material there to come out and a little bit here. I think carving these trays is a really good, it's just a really good exercise in using basic chisels. It sort of tunes you into, you really have to react to the material, and it just gives, it's a great way to understand wood basically, and how it works, and yeah, just I find that if you wanted a good introduction to the chisels, it's quite a good process for that. So I think I'm okay with that. You could, there's various ways you could check the flatness, and you could take it to a much flatter surface if you wanted to. I've made some bigger trays that have been very I've spent a long time establishing a really true sort of flat surface on before carving them, but I'm gonna work with that, I think. So now I'm just going to sort of clean up these edges all the way around, and then that takes a little bit of time. We've got to sort of try and work in these bottom corners nicely, and then we'll be ready for the next sort of step in the process. So, let's go in with that one. So I'm imagining this tray has a little sort of splay to the sides. I don't often make them kind of vertical. I think they have something about them that's nicer if they're not. But you can do anything. Anything is possible.
So is this where you're going right up to the line now, basically?
Yeah, I found with these trays that the corners are always the trickiest bits, really. So I'm using the very hastily scribbled on corner lines, as a very rough guide, and then establishing those corners, just cutting back slowly, and then I'll cut a kind of straightish, or not straightish, but a splayed cut right up to the lines on the edges and the end grain. But I'm just taking the corners first, because if I ignore the corners and jump straight into cutting the sides, then I'll just end up with a lump of material here, and there'll be all sorts of potential to sort of send a split down where I don't want one. I'm going to use the mallet again for the end, particularly for the end grain, because that's fairly tough. Once I've sort of established, where's my lines back there, still got quite a lot to take out. I'm just going to, rather than come in here and take all that in one go, I'm going to come in, just use a little bit of the edge of the chisel and not try and go right back here. I'm going to do it in steps. It's much less risky and much less force needed to. And then I can come back again. I'm sort of using this plane that I've established here so as a guide. Now I can rest the flat of the chisel here. I don't have to get as too hung up on this because this isn't the finished surface, but it's quite nice if you've got a sort of cleanish surface to work with. Come around here. Okay, I'm going to switch to the other end. So I'm just finishing cleaning up a little bit on these edges, and then we'll be ready for the next step in the process.
So basically you finished all 4 edges.
Yeah, spending a little bit of time, particularly on the end grain, getting a nice sort of cut down here, because I've found through having made enough of them that sort of helps with the next process, the next step. It just makes it a little bit easier. So, yeah. Right. So we're pretty much there now. And you probably don't need to go to that level with it. I mean, you can, it's a useful sort of skill in its own right to practice flattening out a surface like that. And I can feel there's some high spots and low spots, but I think I'm happy with that. We'll now move on to the next step. So there's different ways I can approach this, but I think different ways you can order it. But my sort of preferred method from doing it a few times is that I'm going to establish the first 2 channels in here, and then kind of work in these corners and the end grain sections. I've found them to be probably the trickiest areas, and particularly the sort of the point at which these grooves meet the first groove along the bottom there. So that's where I sort of tend to come in first, basically. So I'm taking the number 7, and again that's about as far. If I come back here, I'm going to be diving too deep in the wood. I can't push that through, so I'm working just probably a bit closer to me than halfway, or round about the halfway point. And as with before, I tend to do this all by push. You could use a mallet, a little mallet, and help it through. I mean, this wood's carving really quite nicely, so there's not that much resistance, so I can just push it through. And I'm just sort of working it down slowly, being careful with this corner to run it along as close as I can to this edge without sort of catching on it. And then here I've gone as far as I can on that corner, so I'm going to bring the gouge out here, just rock it in there, and a little bit more. Flip it around. Right, so that's about as far as I can go there. Coming on this side. And the width and the depth of these channels, I'm just really judging by eye. I've got a lot more relaxed the more of these that I've done. Like, I used to mark out some reference lines, and sometimes I'll do that on a particular tray if it's really kind of geometric and I want that to be part of it. But mostly I'll just start and then just constantly be using your judgment, really. So I kind of started to establish those, then I'm going to come in usually with a slightly tighter radius on the corners, maybe somewhere a slightly different one. Let's have a look. So actually, we'll go in with that. because it's a sort of, it's a wider arc here than at the bottom, it tends to be a kind of tapered channel there you're cutting, so I sort of open it out a little bit on the top. And maybe come back with the other one. Much tougher on the end grain. But I'm just using my body weight, almost resting my chest on the top of the handle and just pushing it down. You could use a mallet, it works just as well. Wrong one. We'll try it with the mallet. It's quite tough. I'm being quite careful to not cut beyond that sort of, that little flat I've created at the bottom there. Just find if you get a nice tight, or a nice clean junction there, it's sort of quite pleasing.
So Jack, we just want to do a brief recap of what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, so we've got to this point with the tray so far. We've got a depth defined that we're happy with and we're going to work with. Then I've started to define these first grooves in the bottom, because I find that where they meet the ends, it's a little bit trickier there. So I quite like to do that straight away. And now I'm just going to work in on these corners, define the corners, and then work in the end grain sections, and then we'll be back into the bottom. So I'll just dive into that now, I think.
And you've adjusted the layout ever so slightly, haven't you?
I have, because most of what I'm doing now is, again, I'm just working against a single stop. I've put this in there, which is just a wooden peg that's just hammered into a hole, just so if I do want to work that way, I've got that option as well. But most of the work I'm going to be doing now, I'm going to be carving in this direction, so I'm just a bit more comfortable than doing that straight on than if I was this way around. So yeah, that's that. So I'll get cracking. I'm going to start with this one in there. So I'm going to come in the corners first. And you can see I'm not being rigid about. I've sketched in these lines very sort of loosely to give me a guide, but I'm not being rigid about that at all. I'm just going to go where I want to, really. And depending on different woods, this cherry's quite tough on the end grain, so I'm half torn between just pushing the gouge through or a little bit of mallet work, but I'm going to keep just pushing it. I feel a bit more control that way. And I'm being conscious where I stop, because I don't want to cut too deep in there. These corner grooves kind of taper as they go into the corner, so they're a bit narrower at the bottom, so I tend to use a couple of different sweep gouges to do that. It's a bit of a dance around, and then once you come out of the corners you're just back onto one single gouge for the rest of it. So right. I should say that the sharper the tools, the better, the easier it is to carve, basically. And I tend to just keep touching them up by stropping them on. Where's my? I'll show you my strop. It's just a piece of suede glued onto a bit of wood with a honing compound that's rubbed on there. And I've got a couple of these, one that's sort of a finer one, which is this, and I'll just strop it on there, and then the inside is done with a dowel that's got a bit of suede similarly wrapped around, and I've got a few different pieces that fit the different sweeps. It's simple as that, and you can keep, I don't have to do anything on the stones for a long time unless I hit something or damage the edge. That'll keep it going for, keep touching up the edge for ages like that. But the sharper the tools, the less resistance, the easier it is. So as I come out of the corner, I'm kind of thinking about sort of straightening up these lines a little bit, which will make more sense as you see it. Let's get back on that one. You see how I'm using my hand here as a kind of guide to work against. My thumb's pushing in, and then all I have to really do is think about is pushing the tool down, engaging the cutting edge of it, pushing down partly with my body and obviously my hand, and then just steering that in there. And I think that it's quite useful to think about these tools as you don't need to use the whole edge at once. You can bring it out here or just use a part of the tool. Okay, I'm going to flip it around, come into these corners. once you've got a bit of a groove defined, it makes it so much easier to get in there. Sort of naturally is just guiding the tool. I'm just sort of, in the bottom here, I'm just kind of playing around with different gouges and just kind of rocking it in there gently to sever the fibres, but not deliberately not going in really deep, because I just want to get a clean, I'll then come back in with the other gouge in the bottom to clean that little corner out, which is probably the trickiest bit, I think. Particularly if you want a nice clean kind of defined line. Because there's quite a lot of resistance on the end grain, I'm really got my body right behind the tool. If that's too much, I can. Alright, so one more. Do that one. I'll do that one there. So we now got all the corners defined in, which I always find is useful to do first because it's a bit more of a faff. What I need to do is just clean up right in the bottom where these corner grooves come down and meet this first one here. So I'm just going to use this little chisel for that. See if that does the job. And I'm just sort of going to ease in there. Very kind of gently. And then back up here, just rocking it to break those last little bits off. That's one. You can be really quite delicate with these gouges and just, it's almost like using a sloyd knife and just take a tiny little bit of material, but working into corners is always a bit more of a faff. So. this little corner. Okay, so I'm basically there with that. Happy enough with that. And now there's different ways I could go, but what I'm going to do is work these end grain sections and finish them off first. I could come back to that later, but yeah, I'm going to do that now. And then jump into the bottom. The reason I do the bottom before the sides is I've just found through trial and error that it's easier that way to, once the bottom is defined and all the grooves are carved into there, I can kind of try and align these side grooves with some of the bottom ones. As they come out of the corners, I'll sort of blend them into them. Doing it the other way around I've found to be just a little bit less straightforward, I think. Because it's easy to cut more grooves on one side than the other. Not that it has to be like that. You can do them and they totally don't align, and that's fine. So now I'm jumping. I should be pretty much just using the number 7 sweep for the rest of it. I just had to dance around with the different ones to cut these kind of tapering flutes in the corner. And at this point, I'm starting to look. Here I've got this gap here. I'm thinking, how many more grooves can I get in there? I can measure. I've got 4.5 centimetre there, 5 there. It doesn't quite work out. I think I'll probably get 4 in there. You can move them along. You can play around with them. It's not a rigid thing. Again, I'm going to reach for the mallet to make it a bit easier. Quite gentle taps. And then I'll usually, when I've got 3 left, I'll usually sort of define the middle one first. Just think it makes it a little bit easier to end up with 2 even spaces. I'm always kind of using my hand as a guide, so I don't have to, if I was up here, everything's a bit more floppy and less controlled, so I'm always resting part of my body on the work, and that way I don't have to think about, this flopping all over the place. I can just be mindful of steering it in the cut. So you can see they're not perfectly even in their widths, but I think all of that adds something to the sort of handmade quality of the piece. I think if you sort of calculated it mathematically, it would lose something. It wouldn't be as exciting. I usually find that a push finish with the gouge is just a bit more clean and satisfying. So I'm just going to work over those. And you can keep playing around with it until you're happy with it, really. Come back the other way. It's quite useful to kind of register the chisel. Not necessarily going to take the whole cut in one go, but there I've taken a bite already, and now I'm just registering the chisel where I want. And that's it. I'll come in again. So if you feel like this one was quite a lot wider than that one, but you can sort of steal a bit back. So nothing's. You can usually get around that. Okay, a little bit more awkward here because I'm working down this sharp slope. So I'm just going to try and push it in a little bit. And as with anything on these, it's kind of important to think about not letting these corners work below the surface, because you'll tear out the grain very easily if you do that. So I think I can get 3 in there quite nicely. I'm just going to come back here so I'm not leaning over. It's quite easy because you're sort of leaning over a lot of the time. It's quite easy to sort of lose sight of the direction that you're carving in if you're not careful. So I'm used to doing it now, but I think it's quite easy to sort of carve off at a funny angle there. So you have to kind of constantly be checking that stuff and thinking about it. Takes a really nice finish off the gouge, this cherry, but it is quite tough to carve on the end grain. Probably, definitely easier with a bit of mallet work as well. It would be even harder if it was dry. So I can come back a bit later and just clean up those if I want, or to be honest, I'm quite happy with that. I can do a little bit of fiddly chisel work in there later just to clean it up. So now I'm going to move on to the bottom again, and it's going to be a lot easier to carve in there because I'm not working on the end grain. Yeah, and my approach is generally to sort of work in from both ends, and then as with here, just make a kind of judgment at a certain point. It's a bit more tricky here. I'm a bit more sort of cautious about how I do it. And on some trays, if they're wider and bigger, depending on the form of them, I might make a few reference lines with a pencil. Sometimes these lines I'm not carving perfectly straight. They'll be following a wobbly line at the end. So I'll just probably make a few reference lines. But here I'm just gonna go in by eye, and I certainly wouldn't mark out each one because I think it sort of makes you work in a slightly rigid way where you don't. I think it's useful to have a bit of that freedom where you can be a bit more fluid about what you're doing, really. So again, I can only carve from about halfway, so I'll sort of come in maybe 2 or 3 channels. I'll start here and then I'll flip it round and work in from the other side. And this is all going to be pushing. I'm not going to use the mallet at all here because it's quite a lot less resistance. And I quite like to try and define quite a nice sharp edge along where the 2 grooves meet. So I'm just kind of watching that line and kind of working into it. And you can kind of think about it as taking lots of little shallow scallop cuts rather than pushing the tool right through, right across the piece of wood.
And are you stopping just before the end?
I'm not. I'm basically going into the end, but I'm being quite careful not to push it right through the end sort of thing. So I'm lightening my cuts there. I'll probably leave a little bit of material like that, and then as I jump back onto the sides, that gets sort of cleaned out then. So I'll come in. Little kind of stop-start motion can be quite useful. Maybe get in one more. And there's all sorts of ways you can hold the tool, but I'm sort of applying a bit of force down, and then this hand is really just in control of where it is in the cut and how I present the angle, the edge of the tool to the wood. So it's taking a nice cut for green wood. Sometimes I'll let these dry a bit before doing the finishing cuts, but here I would be quite happy with that. So I'm going to flip it round, come in the other way. This is the sort of thing you could practice doing on just a practice board before, if you wanted to have a go at carving a tray and you didn't feel you had confidence in your sort of tool control yet. It's a really nice thing, just cutting some nice grooves across the grain of a piece of green wood. It's just it'd be a good exercise in just practicing. Okay, I'm going to jump onto the other end now. There's nothing to say you couldn't use a mallet here, but I felt more like I got more control with just pushing. But some woods are much tougher carving, so there could be a place for doing that. And I have carved a few very deep trays and found that these straight gouges would be limited in their reach, so I wouldn't be able to do the whole thing. But I've got a few bent ones, basically exactly the same profile, but just a bent gouge, which allows me to come in over a deep, in much deeper, basically. So usually there is a tool that you can use to do the job. I'll go one more. That's another option than picking up a mallet and doing it, is that sometimes I'll just give it a jolt through with my palm or something. Okay, I'll flip it round again. I'm sort of really leaning into it now, just try and push these through. There is a kind of sweet spot with how deep you choose to carve these grooves. I've tried some with a much deeper gouge, bit more like the number 9 one. But of course, because you're exposing these ridges are basically short sections of very short grain, so they become more. The more sort of high and delicate they are, the more vulnerable they are to breaking off. So I think, yeah, I found that going much beyond a number 7 is probably not, or I have done some very narrow ones as well, which kind of works. But some number 5 to a number 7 seems to work quite nicely and has the right kind of feel about it. So now I'm starting to look a little bit here at the sort of distances I've got between them left, and you know, this has got a bit of a curve in it, which I quite like. I'm going to just go with that, but then I'm going to start thinking about sort of bringing them a bit more parallel as they come together, just so that they sort of blend together without jarring. And there's nothing really to stop you sort of roughly defining all the grooves across and then reworking over the surface, but this is just the way that I've kind of learnt to do it, really. Okay, so I'm now at the point where I've made a judgment that I can get 3 more in there. And you can see it's a bit wider at this end than here, but that's fine. I can work that in. So I'm gonna start in the middle. If you wanted to, you could make a sort of reference line there to help, but I'm just going to go in by eye. Just going small and then open it out a bit. Okay, flip it round. I'm constantly making a kind of judgment about how much material I'm leaving either side and just trying to keep it fairly much in the middle. Okay, so I'll jump over here. Quite important to have really nice light when you're doing any kind of carving like this, just so you can really see what you're doing. Quite often I'll have a kind of raking light coming across because it just exaggerates everything and it gives you a really good, just really clear view of what you're actually carving. But we've got a bright sunny day today, so it's quite good. You see, I'm sometimes sort of jumping into another one, just widening it out a little bit. Let's have a little look. I'm going to flip it round again, one last little bit in there. We're pretty much there, so I'm happy with that. And now I'm going to jump on to carving the sides, and it's exactly the same principle, but as before I'm pushing down with my body leaning over, and I'm going to try and not straight away, but by the time I sort of move along, I'm going to try and sort of align the grooves that I'm cutting with the ones in the bottom. I used to be quite rigid about that, but I've sort of loosened up because I think it's fine. They can be anywhere, really. Again, I might. I'm leaving a little bit at the bottom because I'll come back to clean that up after I've done everything. sort of thinking that by the time I get to about here, I'll probably have them running into the bottom grooves. Quite useful again to do that, just sort of register the chisel on there. You can see that I'm kind of steering off to the left a little bit, but that's all right. And come back and straighten them out a bit if I want to. So I'm not overcutting in the bottom at the moment. I'm just going to leave that little bit of material in there because that will be easier to clean out with a slightly different tool. No reason why you couldn't use a mallet here. It's quite fairly tough to carve through with pushing, but I'm going to carry on like this. I'm quite happy to work like that. And with this sort of irregular surface on the top edge here, it's a little bit more tricky to start the cut. You've just got to. I'm probably kind of doing it in two goes really. Just get it going in there and then come back. Okay, now I'm going to jump to this end. Nearly there. 3 more to go. So I'm just using this side of the gouge. So you don't have to push the whole thing through. You can just use part of the edge like you would with an axe. It's got a much smaller edge obviously, but it's okay, so I'm basically there now. And the next step would be to jump over here and then just clean up all these little junctions at the bottom where there's just a little bit of material left in there. And then we're pretty much done, I think, with the inside after that. So I've finished up the other, carving all the grooves on the other side as you saw before, and now I'm basically ready to just clean up a little bit in the bottoms where I've left a little bit of material in, and just tidy up these junctions down here. So I'm going to use. I've found that this is actually just an old chisel that's flat, and I've kind of ground a curve on the end, and I've found that that's quite useful to get in here. You can do it. You can kind of do it with the number 7 gouge, but it's just catching on the corners a little bit. And because this has got a curve, it'll go into the depth of the groove on the wall of the tray. So I just sort of push it in, give it a little rock, and I'll kind of move along and just severing the fibres that way. And it's best to be sort of patient with this stuff. Don't try and force it out. You've just got to take your time. Of course, you could do it much rougher than this. You could just go in and overcut so that you overcut the depth and overcut this way to pop that bit out, and that would be fine. It would work. It would just be a lot more of a sort of rough finish, I guess. So I'm just going to switch it round, come in down this way. Not quite the right sections up. I'm going to go to again. I've ground that with a bit of a curve in, so that will go in there. But that's actually a gouge, this one, rather than a flat.
So this is where you basically pop them out?
Yeah, I'm just severing those last little bits of material there. You can see it's not quite the right profile, that, so I'll come in with a smaller one. Yeah, and they just pretty much just pop out. And you can spend as much time as you want on this and get a really immaculate finish, or just leave it, do it fairly quickly. I'm not putting much force behind it at all. I'm just gently pushing it through. I'm kind of thinking about where the edge is, like if it's in the bottom of one of these grooves, or if it's coming up onto the ridge, much less pressure is needed there. Just come in there. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to then work up this end. I could spend more time on that, but I'm okay with that. Pop these last little bits out. I'm going to twist it around that way, I think. And try coming in with something like this. Just to clean that little bit out. Okay, that's those two sides. Sometimes I'll go back and see something and just give it a little bit more tidy up, but that's the principle anyway. And then carry on over here.
So have you now just finished off the same in terms of tightening up all the edges and where they all meet?
Yeah, we're pretty much there now, so I'm happy with that. I've just tidied up in there. You know, you can spend as long as you want doing that, but that's to all intents and purposes, everything on the inside of the tray is now finished. If that wasn't taking a clean cut off the tools, sometimes green wood is it doesn't take the cleanest of finishes off a sharp tool, so it might be that I'd go back over it, but probably I would do that by not carving the actual grooves until it had dried off a bit. Just give it a few days to dry off a little bit, and then. But it's taking a very nice cut, so I'm happy with that. So yeah, the next step is basically to define the outside, and we've got these very rough pencil lines in there. It's looking a little bit thin there, so I'll probably step that back a little bit, which is fine. It's all doable. You can adjust everything at this stage. So I'm going to do that by.
So how would you normally do it?
Well, normally I would do that on the bandsaw because it's just so much quicker. Certainly to rough it off, and then I would sort of rework those bandsawn surfaces. I wouldn't the bandsaw wouldn't be the finished surface. That I would plane, carve. There's all sorts of different design possibilities for how we could finish that, and we can talk a little bit more about that when we get it cut out. So what I think I'll do is just the other thing to mention is that, which is probably clear from some points earlier in the video, is that I've got a kind of tapering walls to this tray, so it's going to have a splayed side on it. And if I maybe show the end grain on here, so you can see that pencil line there would come out here. I'm not going to get hung up about marking it out, but just to show you, it's probably going to be something like that. The walls of the tray will be cut to. And because we're going to use just hand tools, I'm going to axe off some of that material, and then maybe a little bit of drawknifing to clean it up. That's on the two sides. For the end grains, I'll make a saw cut across, and possibly a saw cut just to take the corners off a little bit, and again back on a drawknife or plane or chisel. There's lots of different possibilities there, and we can maybe demonstrate a few of those.
Just one quick thing before we move on to that stage. It's something you mentioned just briefly off camera, and I thought would be useful to get on camera, is that when you're normally making these, you make them in batches. Yeah.
So yeah, to kind of make the process a bit more efficient, I found that making them in batches just works better. So I'd usually take sometimes quite a lot. I might make like 12 at once, and I'll split out all the blanks. Often again using the jointer to flatten the bottoms. I'm not doing everything by hand all the time. Just whatever can be used to speed up the process. That surface will always be worked again by hand, tools to finish. But so yeah, usually I'll sort of do everything in steps. I'll make a number of blanks, mark them all out. I might then leave them to a bit. If it's very green wood, I might just leave them sitting around to dry off for a little bit. I've sort of played around with different things with that. And then yeah, I'll have a few days of solid just hogging out all the material, which I do generally do as I demonstrated. I've experimented a little bit with using machines for that, but I don't find it any quicker, and it's certainly not as pleasant to do. So I just do that bit by hand, and yeah, doing it in steps like that it just speeds it up. Basically, the process. I can just get into the zone and churn them out.
So are you going to be axing the sides now?
Yeah, I'm just going to basically take the sides. I won't take them right up to the line, but I'm just going to remove that material, sort of defining a bit of a splayed side wall to the trays. Only obviously the two sides. I'm not going to touch the end grain with an axe. That'd be ridiculous.
And what axe are you using, in case people are curious?
It's a Japanese axe. I think it's probably quite a cheap, nasty one actually, but it's sort of, I think I found the edges a bit soft, and then the handle broke, so I just stuffed a bit of wood in there that's not really, I haven't finished carving it, but just use it like this for a while and then carve it where I want it to be, if you know what I mean. I quite often do that with axe handles, but it's quite nice. It's quite light. Basically, any axe would do. Any kind of carving axe will do the job. So I'm just going to make some sort of relief cuts in there. And then just come in carefully. It's got quite a nice wide flat bevel on there, so you've got quite a lot of area to, it's quite good for sort of hewing smaller material like this. And I'm being quite mindful of very much looking on the inside at the wall, the angle of the walls, and just following that by eye. Although I did make a little reference line there earlier, which I'm sort of using. Not going too gun-ho with it, just quite gently. Grain changes direction there, so it'll probably come from the other way. Okay, you can see the grain is then running off a little bit there, so I've got to be quite careful and cut back from the top. You have to be careful here because I've got not a huge amount of material left behind that end there, so I don't want to rest that edge and then be hammering down, because there's a danger that I could split some of that material off. But resting it on that bottom edge like that would be okay. I'm just going gently. Again, I'm just going to do that really by eye. And just keep looking down. I'm actually going to make a line. Just grab my pencil. Because I'm basically working blind there. I can't see that line when I'm axing, so I'm going to just extend it up there and give myself a bit of a guide. Okay. to the other way. Oops. Constantly looking at the angle as I get closer to the line. Okay, that's that side. Again, just having a look at the grain direction. And you can see here that it's running out this way, so I'll start from the top there. Then it sort of dives in here, but I think that's beyond. Yeah, that's all right. So it should be mostly from here. And just put a bit of a reference on there. It's really definitely helpful when you're leaning it over like that and you can't see. You need something to guide you a bit. Do with this axe, just using it now, I feel that this bit's all unnecessary. I'm basically using all of that I could do with an axe with a really short handle, I think, for this. But then it would be less versatile. I couldn't do more powerful work with it as well. Just changing direction of the grain in there, so I'll come back at that. Quite a useful way, because it's quite tricky to land your axe exactly where you want it on the end. So just find that stepping it in like that gives you some safer point to aim for just in here. Stop there. Oops. So that's about as far as I'm going to go with the axe. And now I'm going to make a couple of saw cuts to take this material off the end. And then we'll be pretty much there. Just a bit of clean up, maybe with a draw knife. Although the axe marks I actually quite like on there. That's not something I normally do, so I quite like that. Okay, so we've axed off the sides, and they're pretty. I'm quite pleased with that. Now I just need to make two cuts to take the end grain. I'm going to make some very sort of quick lines for when I'm sawing down there, so I can see.
And now you're going to get an angle as well.
I'm going at an angle, and I'm just eyeballing it with what I can see inside the tray. You know, I can redefine that edge, and I'll leave the lines in so that I finish again with maybe with a draw knife or something like that. But just having a reference line is really useful when you're. So do the other end. something like that. This line's actually too close there, so I'll step it. I'll definitely cut away from that. Okay, so that's all ready to be cut. I'm going to clamp it down onto the bench and cut it. And I found that holding these, once you've moved material, to work the sides and ends is a little bit tricky. I mean, you can clamp it down like that easy enough, but once you've taken the material off, you've got no straightforward way to hold the thing if you want to work on it further. So I've just started using like a piece of cork glued onto a bit of wood and found that to be quite useful. Just stick it in there. Here I'll put it like that. Then use a hold fast. Go. It's in the wrong place. We'll go in there. And on that one I can just clamp it on the waste material. We use that for the other side. It should stay still. And then I'm just using a bog standard, quite a fine-toothed cross-cut saw, an old one from somewhere. If I had a nice sharp Japanese saw, I might use that. End. So we'll try this. Yeah, the cork just basically protects the carving in the bottom of the tray. Could use leather or something like that. Just had some cork around. Might do it against the Stop it sliding around so much. Just about works. Okay. So we're nearly there now. Just a bit of cleaning up on the sides, particularly on the end grain. I think I'll do that with a draw knife, and probably take these corners at the same time, maybe with a bit of chisel work and draw knife, or just draw knife. So I'll set that up now and then we'll get that done. Okay, so now I'm going to clamp it in just a regular woodworking vise, but yeah, that's where I found this to be really useful, so just pop it in there. Just slide it down. Just big enough, I'm just resting on there. And that's not going anywhere, so that's ideal. I'll just take the corners, I think, with the chisel because I'm angled up, and if I work with the draw knife I'll be having to be cat-handed. So
it's what? Is this a flat chisel?
just a flat chisel, the same one we use to hog out the material or to split out the material in the inside of the tray. And yeah, I'm just conscious of grain direction as I come round the corner. So working from the side grain round to the end grain basically. And kind of skewing the chisel so that as I come off here, I'm not going to split a big bit of material off. Could be easier for me to really set this up the other way in the vise and just pull the draw knife, but we'll go like this for this side. You could do that on the other end. Check where we are. I'm using my pencil lines, my very first pencil lines on the top edge, really as a very loose guide. I'm then just kind of eyeballing it and putting it where I want it to be to kind of maintain roughly a fairly regular wall thickness to the tray. So it's not at all like making a piece of joinery where you mark the lines and cut exactly to it. Sort of, they're just a guide. And one thing we talked a little bit, Zed and I talked a little bit off camera about, was that with the outside walls of the tray, there's kind of infinite possibilities of ways of finishing them and adding decorative carving, and you see lots of interesting examples where there's carved texture like the grooves on the inside, on the outside of some trays. So I've played around with lots of different finishing, and yeah, so you don't. There's a whole world of possibilities out there. But at the moment, I'm just going to keep this quite rough. I quite like I think I'm just going to leave the axe marks. I'm just going to work the corners with the chisel and then clean up this sawn surface with the draw knife. Equally, you could just use the chisel for that. A little bit of movement on this side because it's not supported there, but that's fine. I just got to be a bit careful with it. I'm not trying to take too much material in one go. I'm just back down here. I could have done this with an axe if I was feeling very brave, but it gets a bit more risky as you start working near the end grain, and it's just very likely that you'll sort of break a bit of material off here, so it's definitely a safer bet like this. Bit more there. quite like these. I usually do carve the corners with a chisel because I quite like the sort of little faceted surface you get on it. Which really, in certain lights you really see it. I'm just going to bring the draw knife and maybe come off this side. So here it's basically the same. I'm going to skew the draw knife. This is just I don't know why it's such a thick blade. It's an old one. But I'm going to skew it like that and then just kind of come up. Be quite gentle with it as you come off the end grain here. It's pretty easy to tear off some material. Okay, that's done, I think. Flip it around. I'll do this one facing the other way because I think it will probably make life a bit easier. And do it all with the draw knife then. And I can also see this edge better, which is an advantage. I'm just working my way round. I'm not taking too much material at once. Keep checking where you are. I think draw knifing green wood is probably one of the nicest things you can do. This corner. Got a bit more material on here. It's a bit thicker, the wall here, so I'm going to come up there as well. Maybe not, the grain's running the other way. See, I've got lots of tiny little nicks in the blade, which are leaving these little. That's fine. I like that. I see that a lot on all sorts of old woodwork, where there's tiny little. Little bit of material here, it's quite thick on the rim here, so I'm going to just take that down a little bit and then it's there. Just have a look. Yeah, so pretty much there. I could take that corner a little bit more, maybe a little bit up here as well. And then, yeah, I'll come. I think I'll just do that. Go that way. Grain's running the other way there. So just come on. That's better. I quite like these axe marks, so I think I'm just basically going to leave them in there. Anything that sort of tells of the process I think is quite nice. Some people might think it's very rough, but I think the contrast with that and then the very clean carved surface is really quite nice. And just a little bit on that corner. So that's the edge is done. You can sort of see it suddenly becomes quite a different thing when you've cut all the material around it away. It becomes a tray. So that's essentially it. There's a little bit of cleanup to do on these sharp edges, and the same on the bottom. And then I could rework that bottom as well. That's possible. I quite often sort of carve some shallow fluting across there as well. So we can have a look at that in a minute. Okay, so we've cut the outside out, and I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave these quite crude axe marks. I just quite like that. And the only remaining things to do is to look again at the bottom. I could just either leave it with the scrub plane tool marks, which has certain quality of its own, but I think I'm going to just rework that surface with this nice sweeping flat gouge. So to do that, that's a bit irregular surface, but it sits okay on there. I'm just going to fix down this batten again and just work against that. So it's a very similar process to carving the grooves in the bottom, but I wouldn't go that deep with it. And I'm just going to do it really by eye. You could do it with a plane, probably be a bit quicker, but I quite like the kind of undulating, and it's got a really nice feel to it, the surface. You have to be mindful of how much depth you've left in the bottom. Obviously, if you take more material, I know there's quite a thickness in there, so I could go down quite a bit on that. This is where a sort of raking light really helps, because it gets hard to see on these shallow sort of grooves, but I can just about see enough. Can you get it on camera?
I can, yes.
Yeah. Be a little bit careful coming on to the cut there. Just ease your way into it. It's a really lovely tool to use, this one. I'm just sort of eyeballing these points where the shallow grooves meet, and just keeping them roughly in line. I have also done the sides and bottom of trays like with much more texture carved in, with a smaller shallow gouge, which can be quite nice, and it has a really nice feel to it, but just takes more time to. I'm going to switch it around. And this part of what I'm doing now is very much my own sort of take on the Wagatabon. I have no idea how the Japanese ones are finished on the bottom. I've seen this kind of surface, but I suspect it's probably done with a plane. But I don't know. There's probably different, lots of different ways that it's done. So this is just my own kind of method that I use on some of them. I just quite like the idea that the bottom is as interesting as the top, really. And it has some texture other than just either a perfectly flat plain surface or you could like, if you wanted to, you could sort of mark this out with a pencil or something, but I'm just going completely free form with it. Funny how this is carving now. It's like a totally different tree from the one we were trying to break open and struggling with yesterday. It's like feels like it's carving beautifully on the bottom. So that's it, really. You sort of see in the light, it's just I could keep going with it, but that's fine. I'm happy with that. So the very last thing that I would do with these is just take off these sharp edges, basically, on the bottom end and on the top of the rim on the outside, which is a little bit more tricky around these wavy surfaces, but I'll probably use a little knife to do that. So I'll jump onto that now. So I'm just going to finish up with a little Sloyd knife, just a very thin one that's good for going around the wobbly surfaces. I think this is from...
is that David Cockcroft?
No, it isn't. I think it's from Hewn and Hone, is it?
Ah, right,
so
yes.
Maybe Nick Westerman's ones. Nice little thing. You can do it all sorts of ways. I'm just gonna dive in.
And obviously people use whatever carving knife they have.
Any knife will do, yeah. You just might, when you go around these little deep changing bits, you've just got to get the tip in there and kind of turn the corner. I'm coming off the wrong way there. Because of my background, I'm much more comfortable with chisels and the more conventional woodworking tools than Sloyd knives I've only really been using for a few years. It'd be a job to do this with the chisel. So I'm just taking that edge off, and it feels nicer in the hands, and it looks nicer, and it's not going to catch on something. You can see I haven't got hung up on the sort of the wall thickness being perfectly even on both sides and stuff like that. It's a very sort of organic piece, this one. And on others I will be more rigid about it and more exact. Another way. These little finishing touches, I find that they make, spending that little bit of time makes so much difference. It pretty much applies to anything you're making, I think. It's not just how it looks, it's the feel of it as well in your hands. That's the top done, and then I'll just quickly go over the bottom. Just went the wrong way down the grain there, it's coming out here. Just last edge to do. The grain's sort of diving off here and then coming back in, so I'll come up, done that bit really. And then go downhill. Yeah, so I think we're there. So that is everything carved now. The only other thing that we were going to maybe demonstrate was have a go at ebonizing, which we can show you.
So Jack, just to kind of wrap up the entire process, a couple of stages I wanted to talk to you about. So firstly, drying. So at this stage, what are your processes for drying the actual tray?
Yeah, basically I've got in the workshop here, it's quite divided. So this half of the building, where I've got the shelves up there, it's the north wall, and it doesn't get any sun, and it's quite a sort of cool, constant temperature in here. So I can be quite relaxed about that. I've found that it's a very slow drying process, but I would say that with cherry, go gently. So people talk about putting things in paper bags or covering them in shavings. I never really bother with that stuff. I just basically let it dry, but don't put it next to a radiator. Don't leave it in the sun. It'll dry fairly quickly, but before any finishing, really, you want to probably leave it for a month or so. And yeah, just kind of see, I'm interested with the cherry to see how much it does move. Yeah, just if you think you've got quite a lot of heat, basically avoid too much heat and avoid too much airflow. So wind will dry wood very quickly as well. So if in doubt, just cover it in shavings and leave it in a corner, a sort of cool corner for a week or two, and then slowly sort of bring it into a normal environment, but make sure it's really dry before you bring it indoors to a centrally heated thing. That's all I would say. Yeah.
And lastly, oiling. Do you add any oiling to your trays, or do you have any tips and suggestions?
Yeah, I've sort of played around with different finishes on them. I've used tung oil and linseed and all those oils. And I still do a little bit, but sometimes I actually leave them unfinished. On a wood like cherry, I probably wouldn't do that because it's quite a high tannin wood. It'll sort of pick up, it'll stain quite easily. You can sort of see where it has on these ridges from the tools running down them. But yeah, any oil that you want to use would work on there. And obviously there's other sort of oils with different additives in that you can use if you want to go down that route. But yeah, the natural oils, curing oils like tung oil and linseed maybe.
So as I'm about to film this outro, I looked at the viewfinder on the camera, and Jack was a little bit taller. I went, "You're taller," and it turns out he was standing on shavings.
I'm still taller.
You're still taller. I see it. I've got height paranoia now. So guys, there you go. That is a wrap for this video. Jack, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
The pleasure was all mine. It's the first time I've seen this process, especially in its entirety. One thing I do need to add on before I kind of do the full outro is this is the first time Jack has taught on video. The first video in this series was a tour around his workshop, and obviously this video is the first video that Jack has been on where he's taught basically anything, right? Especially something as in depth as this. And it's not easy, having a camera shoved in your face, right? And then saying, right, that's it, do your thing. But no, you've done incredibly well. I learned a lot. I always say the same thing. The less you hear me talk on the videos when I'm collaborating with a maker, it means you're doing awesome.
Okay.
You're talking about everything that needs to be said. So there you go, guys. That is a wrap for this video. A few things to remind you of. Number one, like I mentioned just a moment ago, this video is part of a mini series. In video one, we looked at a workshop tour where we looked around all the different things going on in this amazing workshop that Jack works from full time. In this video, obviously, you've seen the entire process for carving a Wagatabon tray. Now, in the third video of this series, what Jack is going to do is show his process for ebonizing wood. Now, all being well, we're going to attempt to ebonize this very tray that Jack has carved on this video. It's a process I've not covered on my channel yet, so I'm really excited to kind of talk about that and capture Jack's process. So to check out both the previous video, the workshop tour, and the follow-up ebonizing video, links will be in the description. And also another reminder, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this video has been timestamped. As you can see, it's a long video, it's a long process. We've actually filmed this over 2 days, believe it or not, right? So there's a lot of kind of steps in the process. To facilitate that, you can look at the timeline on this video. You can see all the different sections marked out. Also, those sections will be listed below in the description, just below this video. On the left-hand side, you see all the times. As I mentioned at the very beginning, YouTube has a very cool feature. If you click on those times, it will jump straight to that section. So should you move forward and want to use this as a reference, rather than having to manually scroll through, click on the time, boom, that's it. With the power of YouTube, you get taken to that specific section. Also, we're going to put a link below to Jack's website and Instagram. Now, if you gained any value from this video whatsoever, it will mean the absolute world to me. You go over to Jack's Instagram, you give him a follow, and also you check out his website. Now, more specifically with the website, as me and Jack were talking off camera, what Jack is very kindly going to do is create a page on his website with all things Wagatabon related. So he's going to put some pictures up of all the beautiful ones that he's carved from before, a bit of background about the tray, etc, etc. And that's going to be like a work in progress as Jack moves forward, add bits of information that he believes that you will find useful, even maybe referencing some of the tools, etc. But all of that information is going to be on there. Also, as an addendum to that, is even though it's not Jack's focus, he does from time to time teach, don't you?
Yep, I've done, yeah.
Yeah, like one-on-one or groups of two and whatnot. On that page, on the Wagatabon page on his website that I'll link to below in the description, there'll be a little blurb on there about if you're interested in doing that, learning from Jack, then you can obviously contact him via his website. All that information will be on that page. Now, just as we wrap up, the one thing I do want to stress is, you know, I'm very grateful to Jack, you know, as I am with all the makers, that he's allowed me into his beautiful space and then to document his process so that you may learn. And I always want to stress that how grateful I am that you've allowed me that opportunity. So what I'm going to do, like I said, all the links will be below in the description, and it will mean the world to me. Once again, all I ask, I don't ask for much on my channel. I don't even ask for people to subscribe. All I'm going to ask is if you've gained any value from this video whatsoever, to head over to Instagram, give him a follow, and also to check out his website and be in touch if there's anything, you know, you're interested in or want to inquire more about. If people do have any questions, would it be okay for them to either contact you at Instagram or email you for the website?
Absolutely, yeah, I'm happy with that. And likewise, if you want to come and learn, and I can only accommodate probably 2 or 3 people here, but yeah, happy to work something out. So just get in touch.
And as a final kind of wrap up, one thing we do want to stress, and this is where I'd like you to kind of explain your thoughts on this, and that is everything that Jack has shown in this video is just Jack's process. He's not saying it's the only process or the best process, it's just what works for him. So is that something you want to maybe just spend a moment just talking about that? Yeah,
just to say that really these are sort of traditional Japanese trays and that I've been very much inspired by, but the process for making them is entirely my own, really. Gleaning as much as I can from Japanese makers without sort of having gone and spent time and learnt the traditional way of doing it. So, you know, the things that I'm making are, yeah, they're a kind of Westerners an outsider's take on it, basically. And yeah, so there's no right or wrong. I'm not saying this is how you do it, but this is the way that I've kind of developed, having made quite a lot of the trays. It's a way that I've sort of developed to doing it, which works for me. Yeah.
Jack, thank you once again.
Thank you, Zed.
He's been an absolute trooper throughout this video and stuff. Like I said, it's not been easy, Yeah, and a camera in your face saying, right, do your thing, but he's done incredibly well. So guys, there you go. I know it's a very long outro, but there's a lot for me to cover and to kind of stress, you know, all the different kind of like additions to this video. So if you watched all the way up until this point, thank you so much. And once again, I really do hope you enjoyed this video and gained some value from this. And like I said, everything that I've mentioned will be linked to below in the description. And that is a wrap for this video. So on that note, as always, I hope whatever you're doing, you have a blessed day, a blessed week ahead. From the Trade Magician, Jack Wheeler, and myself, Zed Outdoors. Peace out.